what I'd like each of you to do is just express whatever you would like to from this past session and the important high points. And then once each of you have had an opportunity to talk, we then will open up the floor for questions, if that makes sense to everyone. And with that, Senator, you're first.
Thank you. It's always fun to be first because everybody can then come along and correct my mistakes and all the things I didn't say after I finish. This has been an interesting session, and there have been, I think, a lot of good things that have happened. Again, like the last session, COVID did do one good thing, and that is I think it actually helped our collegiality in terms of working together towards common ends. We were successful in some ways. We did provide additional aid to businesses and individuals. We did some good stuff in bolstering childcare assistance, which is one of the big problems about keeping people in the workforce. And I think we should be proud of what we did there. There were some things, though, that we perhaps could have done that we didn't do quite as well. And those are opportunities for next time. In particular, I'm concerned for those who are in business that we increased the contribution rates for unemployment insurance by $100 million. And that's something that is going to not have, I think, a positive effect on business recovery. And that's something I am a bit concerned about. We kicked the can down the road yet again on pension reform. And pension reform of public pensions is a huge, huge, huge issue that can affect all of us, not just in terms of the pensions for the public employees, but the cost of the state and the potential damage to our bond rating if we don't get this right and we don't get this problem fixed soon. And I'm afraid it's not going to be a problem that will be fixed to everybody's satisfaction. That's just the fact of life. There's a limitation to what we can do. We made some significant progress with broadband, which is something that I'm really focused on because we really need to have a kind of a policy of no child left offline. And right now we have thousands of kids whose parents are going to parking lots at libraries and in fast food restaurants in the middle of the winter in order to access broadband so kids can do homework. And that's just an unacceptable situation. And although we created a bill that has some long-term planning using communications union districts and other activities to expand broadband, there are lots of things we didn't do. And I'm very concerned that we didn't deal with the issue of broadband affordability. We have broadband lines crossing in front of houses all over Vermont that exist right now, but people aren't connected to them because they can't afford it. And the affordability issue is something that I hope we do, and we do get back to next year, because I think it's really important. There are 25 other things that I could talk about. I don't want to monopolize the time, though, but these were the high points that I would just like to mention. Unfortunately, I've got to leave in 15 minutes to go to Montpelier, hopefully not to do any more damage, but to do a briefing of to the press of what we did in the Senate in this past year. So thanks so much, and thank you all for being here and for inviting us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. With that being the case, if folks don't mind, if anybody has any questions for Randy, if you would like to ask them now, since he's not going to be here later. So if there is anyone that does have any questions, this whole internet scenario on the broadband and the society we live in, that we are so connected in some parts and yet so disconnected in others, is very unfortunate. And to the senator's point, how do we figure this out? Because having people go to parking lots to have children do homework and what have you obviously is not the right answer. So with that being said, from my little soapbox, any other questions for the senator before he leaves? Okay. Well, Randy, I guess that gives you, as you said, the ability to wreak more havoc, as you said today. But thank you. thank you very much, and thanks for all that you do throughout the course of the year. I did enjoy your statement about the 7 months of sleeping and comfort and what have you. Okay, let us move on to Lisa Hango, Representative Lisa Hango.
Thank you very much. One of the things I'll say is I'll echo what Senator Brock said about the ability to work with just about everybody across party lines. We tried really hard to do that because everybody was sort of coming from the same position. We were all on a screen. We were all pretty much sitting in our own homes alone. So we needed to reach out to each other. And I do feel that we were fairly successful at that. One of my greater disappointments is that it was more difficult to work with folks in the Senate. And I'll say this while Senator Brock is on, because they kind of had opposite hours from us and in the House. And it was a little harder to contact people in the Senate, whereas when we're in the State House, we can just run downstairs and run down the hallway to speak to somebody or see them at the cafeteria tables. So in that respect, it was a little harder to follow what was going on in the Senate, unless the bills that they were working on were specifically bills that our individual committees were interested in. And in that case, we were able to keep in pretty close contact for that. So I'm going to just speak to the bills in my committee. We certainly put out as a whole legislature some very important legislation. My committee is which Representative Murphy also serves on, is basically a policy committee. And what we try to determine is what is going to be for the greatest good of most people in the state of Vermont. I feel like there is some legislation that we came together on that was beneficial for small businesses who are in the food and beverage industry. We were able to help those folks. And when you look at who makes up a great portion of small businesses in Vermont, it's small restaurants, cafes, takeout places, and we were able to help a lot of those individuals with their small businesses with different types of policies. So that was encouraging to help those folks get back on their feet and stay in operation. For the most part, our committee dealt with housing issues for a great portion of the year. And we came very close to passing, which probably has gone on to the Senate by now. But the whole legislature, the Senate and the House, has not passed this legislation yet because there was a proposed amendment to what the Senate sent us. So we came very close to passing some housing legislation. We had great debate between the Vermont Landlords Association and Vermont Legal Aid, who primarily represents tenants. And although it was very informative and I think lucrative, the discussions, we did not come to a solid conclusion that everybody could agree on. So I think hence that's the delay in that legislation. And it remains to be seen how quickly it can be passed or not passed. We certainly are aware of the affordable housing crisis. We really would like to see units either come back online or new units be built, but we really need to be thoughtful about how that happens. And I think perhaps with the use of the ARPA money from the federal government, the American Rescue Plan Act money, we will be able to accomplish some really great things that Vermont has not seen in a long time, decades. So we're very hopeful that we can harness those funds to do something really productive for the state of Vermont, to alleviate homelessness for the 2,000 individuals who are currently housed in motels and hotels, and to keep them from, again, being on the street, so to speak. So there's a lot of work left to be done. It was a good time to adjourn because I think we were at a point where we need to step back and rethink this funding that's coming from the federal government. And I look forward to the next session to really be able to delve into this. One other thing that our committee has worked on as well is a number of collective bargaining pieces of legislation. So that took up quite a bit of our time as well this session. I will say that I do regret that we did not do more COVID recovery focused work in terms of passing legislation. That is a big regret of mine, although not being of the majority party, I don't really have a whole lot of say in that, in what we work on. So I really would like to see more of that in the future. And if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to entertain your questions.
I have a question, and this is just an observation. I find that the farmers markets within Vermont got grants, but the vendors that are the people that go to these farmers markets weren't able to get any grants. Is there a reason why, or is there a policy or process that was missed by the small vendors that go to the farmers market?
I don't particularly know the answer to that, Winnie. I wish Senator Parent, who is on Senate Ag, or my district mate, Representative Paul Martin, were here because he's on the Commerce Committee in the House. But I do believe if you search the Agency of Agriculture website, the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, there are some grants for vendors. I've seen some information come out from the Franklin County Chamber of Commerce, and not being on those committees, I didn't memorize the names of the programs, but I see Representative Mike McCarthy has his hand up, so he may be able to elaborate on that.
Thank you. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Winnie, I don't want to jump in ahead of my spot, but I appreciate Representative Hango passing the baton to me. I'm not sure if there's a specific program that was available to farmers markets and not vendors, but there are a bunch of different programs that are available to small businesses. And we could talk offline about the specifics of the Embrace grants that were in H315. Some of those haven't even come online yet, but through the ACCD website, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, there's a whole business portal. We also put some money into H159 to help folks who typically wouldn't have technical assistance for the grant and loan programs that are available, because all of this different money became available to various small businesses. But if you didn't have an organization or a financial advisor that could tell you how to best apply and which ones you fit into, you could be at a disadvantage. And so we wanted to make sure small business people had opportunities to access those resources too. So if you want to talk more offline, I'm happy to schedule some time and point you in the right direction and get you to somebody who's more knowledgeable than us citizen legislators about all of the different programs that are available.
Thank you, Mike. You know, I got your number, so I will be contacting you.
Okay, any other questions for Lisa at this time? And if not, then we will move on to Representative Mike McCarthy. Mike?
Thanks so much, Joe. So this year was definitely different, and it was particularly different for me. I joined the House leadership team as Assistant Majority Leader, the whip, and that gave me a very different perspective than I had in my first couple terms in the House. You know, I stood by the speaker in the beginning of this session, and I talk sometimes when I'm at a forum like this here at home, you know, in Franklin Grand Isle County, where I'm in the minority here and in the majority in Montpelier. And we made commitments to invest in a number of different areas and prioritize housing, broadband, childcare. And I think in many ways we delivered on that. And then there's still a lot of work to be done and some things that could be improved for sure. But overall, I'm feeling great about the foundation that we've laid to have a recovery that doesn't leave anybody behind. I'm new to the Government Operations Committee this year. I served a couple of terms on House Transportation before. And this year, one of my proudest things that we were able to accomplish was, and I got to report the bulk of S15. That's the universal vote by mail bill that we worked on together. And, you know, for the future general elections, we're going to build on the lessons learned and the success of 2020. And every active registered voter in Vermont in general elections is going to be mailed a ballot for the future. That's going to be the new normal. And we made some improvements on and lessons learned from 2020 on that. We looked at continuing the work and making sure that we do have a statewide use of force policy, the criminal justice reforms that we started last fall in the previous session. Things like making sure that we're continuing to ban chokeholds and the use of chokeholds by law enforcement. And another area that Senator Brock touched on was our work on pensions. And you know, Senator Balint and Speaker Krawinski, they made a commitment early in the session to try and tackle what we've known was a huge growing problem with the sustainability of our state employee and teacher pension systems. And I'd agree with Senator Brock that I wish that we had made more progress this session there. But when we started to put proposals on the table, it was clear that there was broad misunderstanding of what was on the table and how that was going to affect Vermont workers that are the beneficiaries and the folks paying into these public pension systems. And there was an enormous amount of emotion and angst in response to any change that might be made. And so rather than saying that we kind of failed to move forward, what I would say is we put in place a task force and a process to have a more open dialogue over the summer about the elements of plan reform that we need to accomplish and we need to put in place, but that which choices get made. And when we get back in January, February, we're going to have to really continue the work that we started this year. And so I would say that we slowed down the process of working on pensions, but I think House leadership at least is very committed to taking on the task of dealing with a $5.6 billion unfunded liability. We did a lot of work and we're looking at more of our work through a lens of equity and dealing with systemic racism and historic injustices across a whole bunch of different policy areas. But some of the places we took some steps forward on this year was H210, dealing with healthcare disparities. We know that BIPOC individuals, we can see the data, have poorer outcomes in our healthcare system. We want to learn more about why is that happening and what are the things that we can do. And so we've put a process in place to collect more data, understand that data, and then be able to act on it. I already mentioned some of the criminal justice reforms efforts that we were doing in my committee and the technical assistance grants and the ability for, one of the things we recognized with the economic recovery monies that we were putting in place was that for women-owned businesses, there are organizations like Vermont Works for Women that were providing technical assistance. For BIPOC-owned businesses, there wasn't really the same kind of organizational infrastructure to help small BIPOC-owned business people access the grants and loans that were available as part of the pandemic recovery assistance, both federal and state. And so we've now put.
Is it just me or is Mike frozen?
Yeah, it looks like he just froze.
He's frozen.
Okay.
On the good side, I'm glad that he froze. So now he knows how badly we need proper internet or best internet. Are you guys hearing me or I'm frozen too?
No, we're here.
We got you.
No, we hear you, Winnie.
Good point.
Melinda, is Mike totally gone? Is he trying to re-log back on or?
I'm not seeing him at the moment. You might want to move on and come back to him.
Yeah, that's what we will do. So now we will move on to Representative Barbara Murphy. Barb?
Thank you so much, and I'll happily let Mike finish his sentence if he pops back on. But I will actually jump off from some of what he said and not duplicate what Representative Hango presented as what our committee did focus on and accomplish, or at least set in place to do a little more work on next year as we have the second year of the biennium to keep rolling. It isn't a end point yet. One thing that we did spend a lot of time on in the committee was a joint resolution that both the House and Senate spent a great deal of time on. It came back to us at the very end, so I have to say it was over the course of the full session, and it is the joint resolution. I'm going to read the full title. Sincerely apologizing and expressing sorrow and regret to all individual Vermonters and their families and descendants who were harmed as a result of state-sanctioned eugenics policies and practices. I think that it's obviously a very controversial topic. It's not a happy thing. We try to celebrate our state's successes, and absolutely not one that you would put on that list, but it's also really important to recognize the things we've done that were wrong. And it is just an apology, which when you say just seems to demean it, but it's to indicate that other work that's being done, and as Mike stated, takes us into where we try to be on a different path and recognize everyone's value and humanity and access to all of the benefits and rights and responsibilities that Vermonters share. So that is something our committee truly spent an incredible amount of time listening to the history of, but also the current day impact of families that lost much because of this action by our state. So I put that out there, that not a happy thing to celebrate, but I think it is that good to acknowledge all of our acts and to use it as a springboard to do better. The other piece that our committee focuses on, we are the military affairs as well as housing and general. And I presented on the House floor a bill H-149 that worked on modernizing some of the statute language for our National Guard. And the key piece that, other than bringing some language up to date that was from the 19th century, it literally applied to how our military and National Guard worked for the Civil War. So needed a little modernization, but we also addressed the job protections for our members in the National Guard so that it equals the federal, what's called USARA. It's the Uniform Service Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. And our statute only really spoke to the 15 days of service because our members would work weekends and 2 weeks a year. But that isn't the case anymore. Quite often assignments are postings of a year or 6 months, certainly greater than the 15 days that this covered. And so we've expanded our recognition of job protection to be that full time frame of service that the federal does. So those are two items that our committee also worked on and took across the finish line. And I think that's an important accomplishment that, especially at the end of a first year, it is exciting to think that what you spent a great deal of focus on actually got finished and accomplished, and we can look to bettering the things that needed more work as we look to the second year of our session. And the housing is just one that we have to resolve. And I do believe we've assigned a great deal of ARPA money to certainly the rental situation, and hoping that we can also get monies into the hands of allowing people to become first-time home owners, not just renting. The threshold is the challenge. And I truly believe believe science and data support that once you are an owner, the monthly costs are very equivalent to rent. That paying rent is no less expensive than paying a mortgage, but being able to get in the door is the hard part. And so I think that we've tried to put some support in place to help people become first-time buyers as well. We have programs to assist with that. And that for me is truly, I'll be very pleased when I see those numbers changing. So thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to all the organizations and hear all the work that people are doing throughout the monthly sessions of this organization, this group gathering. I truly value it. And I know I speak of it every time, but I don't want it to ever go unrecognized. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Barb. Mike has returned. So you froze, Mike, or did you freeze again? He has been here. I think he may have.
And we truly have dealt with these. I'm on DSL. I'm on consolidated communications. I do not have fast internet. When they speak of the speeds, I have 6, not the 100. So we are all working with some pretty rudimentary tools here.
Yes, that is in many instances so true. Any further questions for Representative Murphy before we move on?
Yeah, I would like to ask the representative, I know she touched on it briefly, but in light of changes that are happening with the police department around the country, I know that there's some laws that are on the policies and procedures here in the state of Vermont that are supposed to, in 2021, I believe that it should be obsolete. For example, if you get pulled over, the couple have your driver's license, insurance, and registration in their hands, and will still ask you, are you on probation or parole or probation? I think that they should do their job. You have my information, go to your car and you pull up my name and will tell you if I'm on probation or parole. Because asking that question is immediately telling you, at least the way we interpret it, is because you're black or brown, that you either on probation or parole. God forbid that you're not on those two. So I think that that is a language that should be eliminated ASP. That should not be questions answered. And for people in mental health, that is not a question that a cop should try to evaluate you to know if you're having a mental health situation. They're not mental health professionals, so they should know their place, do their job, and don't step over the line.
Yeah, thank you, Winnie. I think that might be more of a question for Mike in government operations. He did bring forward the work that they've been doing on fair policing policies, but I've made a note of that particular question that you brought forward, because you're correct. That's really, unless it's on a list, they ask absolutely everybody. And I have not necessarily been asked that, just hypothetically, if I might have once upon a time been stopped for speeding. So I really appreciate you bringing that forward. And I think that finding out what's being done differently is what's really important too. So you can't, thinking, oh yeah, I've been stopped and it's really scary is very different maybe from my perspective than from someone else's. So I really appreciate that, Winnie. And if we can get Mike back, I think he might be able to give you a better answer. But as I said, I did take note of that point.
Yeah.
And I would tell you what, I prefer to see the white light than the blue light.
Thanks, Representative Murphy. And I apologize for the internet instability. I'm not sure what's going on there, but Winnie, I really appreciate the perspective that you've continued to share. And I'm really glad that you're working with Melinda and the other folks on the police advisory board that we set up here in the city. The Vermont is going through a process right now of expanding the accountability that we have for law enforcement officers through a reimagined Vermont Criminal Justice Council. So those used to just be the folks in charge of making sure all law enforcement officers were trained in Vermont. But now, later this year, there's going to be a statewide use of force policy put in place. The kinds of things that you're talking about with the questions that a law enforcement officer asks somebody when they encounter them, whether it's a traffic stop or out on the street. Those things vary, whether it's a sheriff or a state police officer or a municipal law enforcement agency. And we have all of these different small law enforcement agencies across the state. All law enforcement officers go through the same training, but then all of the agencies have different policies. And the question that you're bringing up isn't one that I've addressed directly, but I'm going to take it back to the committee and talk to some of the folks at the VCJC about it and get you some more info. So let's keep that conversation going, because we have a lot of good work that we could do to improve the experience that folks have with law enforcement and just make it safer for law enforcement officers and all of us.
And Mike, since you were cut off before, was there anything further that you wanted to express?
Oh, there was one thing that I don't think that I was able to get across that I thought was really important, because Senator Brock had touched on it, which is we had a huge debate in both the Senate and the House about the future of unemployment insurance. And after the Great Recession, there was what everybody refers to as the grand bargain was struck, where we looked at what employers pay in terms of the UI insurance rates and the benefits that employees get, and how we make sure that the trust fund, which was over $500 million at the start of the pandemic unemployment crisis and is now, down to less than half that, how do we build that back up to a place where we can weather the next recession or the next crisis? And if we just went by that formula in the grand bargain, all of a sudden businesses were going to get whacked with a huge increase in rates, going from the lowest tier in that deal that was struck with the grand bargain to the highest rate tier. And in large part because it just looks at the experience of the previous years. And 2020 was such an extraordinarily bad year that it would have immediately triggered this huge increase in rates. So what we actually did wasn't just as Senator Brock said, $100 million increase in taxes on business. It will lead to $100 million of additional UI payout over the next 10 years, it's estimated, and an increase in rates. But what we did was we lowered that rate that businesses will have to pay. And so we won't end up with, after a few years, $1 billion trust fund, which is probably twice what we need. We'll end up with more like a $500 million trust fund, which is more reasonable, I think, for the need that we had during the pandemic. And we're also able to provide an additional benefit. So even when these additional federal funds run out, what we ended up with was an increase in the unemployment insurance benefit of $25 a week, even after the plus up additional federal funds are there. And so this was a compromise that was struck between benefits that we can offer to people when they're in between jobs and they find themselves unemployed, and the desire that we all had to not hit our Vermont businesses with an overnight huge tax rate increase. And I think we did a really good job of finding a path forward that was a good balance between the interests of employers and employees. So that was the last thing I wanted to hit on. And thanks so much for the extra time, Joe. Sorry about my internet issues.
Oh, no, not a problem, Mike. We certainly want to hear everything that each of you has to say. And so does anyone have any questions for either Mike or Barbara at this point?
I have one for Mike. Mike, now you know how other people feel about the internet. Please work on getting yourself and others good internet.
I think you will find tripartisan, universal support for our broadband investments and trying to get this right, Winnie.
And I would add a nonpartisan, speaking as one of the 5 independents. I love that people think about bi or tripartisan, but let's think about nonpartisan.
Okay, and certainly last but not least, Representative Carl Rosenquist. Carl, the screen is yours.
Hey, thank you. I'm in the basement of the batting order, so I can either strike out or have a home run and hit it out of the park, I guess. Anyway, I'll just quickly touch on a couple of bills, several bills that came out of Park Committee. human services that should have a big impact in not just the state, but here in Franklin County. And probably the biggest one of that group is H-171, what we affectionately call the child care bill. And it's hard fought, a lot of work went into it, and ultimately it did go out of the House unanimously to the Senate, and the Senate approved it, and the governor just recently signed it. And this will increase the level of subsidy for child care and increase the, how should I say, the range of people that will qualify for that. In addition, it provides certain amount of funding for child care workers to advance their education, and another program to actually pay them back for expenses that they incurred to get the level of education they're at this point in time. So we think should go a long way to helping with the child care situation. And probably one of the biggest problems is going to be whether there are enough people in the marketplace to still cover child care. But anyway, that's a problem all across the spectrum of employment. So we'll see what happens there. But anyway, we were very proud of that bill, and it went out of our committee and unanimously as well. So it had a lot of support. Another bill which we took up a second year in a row, or it didn't make it across the line last year, and we took it up. And I have to say, this is one that I reversed my opinion on and voted for it out of committee and on the floor, and that was the therapeutic, how shall I say it, the legalization of therapeutic amounts of buprenorphine that is designed to help with, how should I say it, addiction, people that, the way it was explained to me and why I changed my position on it and was for it, was that basically what we call harm reduction, that if it helps alleviate or prevent one or two overdose situations, it was probably worth it in the long run. So anyway, we were happy that went through, and the governor did sign it. He did have some reservations, as many of you probably know, and is asking for a report on how, whether it's really being used correctly, and we'll see how that goes. But he did sign it, so we're happy with that. Another bill we worked hard on, unfortunately, didn't make it across the finish line as far as the Senate was concerned, but it was a bill on creating an Office of Child, Youth, and Family Advocate to help in the situations where so many conflicts between DCF and families relative to possession of children. Okay, believe it or not. In other words, whether a family can retain jurisdiction of their child or vice versa. And it was, we thought we'd put together a good bill, but it didn't make it across the Senate line. I'm sure we'll be working on it again next year. Another bill, we call it the chemical bill, had to do with PFAS chemicals in firefighting foams, as well as other chemicals of concern in food packaging, and believe it or not, ski wax. So anyway, that bill was hard fought in committee because we didn't want, actually, so it needed a reasonable approach that would not stymie the various industries that were affected, or the capability of fire suppression teams to do their work until appropriate alternatives are available. Anyway, we think we came up with a reasonable compromise, and that bill went forward. And finally, just a couple of questions on, we do have an upcoming veto session on the 23rd of June. And as far as I know, there's two bills that, I guess actually three bills that the governor has vetoed. Two were charter changes for, I believe it was Winooski and Burlington, and the other was S-107, which was a bill having to do with increasing the age of adults how should I say, receiving the same treatment as minors or juveniles in the, how should I say it, access to confidential information, I guess the shortest way to say that. Anyway, that bill is a concern to the governor and he vetoed it. So we'll have to see what happens with those three on the 23rd of June. So with that, I'll open it to questions or whatever. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Any questions for Carl?
Looks like
You know,
Lisa
so-
has a question. Okay.
Thank you. It's not a question for Carl, but I just wanted to remind folks that this is not your only opportunity to speak with your legislators. Please feel free at any time during the year to email us or call us or look on the General Assembly website to find out who sits on which various committees and reach out to them, even if they are not the representative who represents your personal town where you live or where your organization is located. If they are on the committee of jurisdiction that takes care of business for your organization, please do not hesitate to reach out to them with any questions, concerns, or comments that you have about potential legislation or legislation that's in the pipeline. This is how we find out from our constituents all over the state how they feel about various issues. And it's particularly difficult when we're operating remotely and not in the State House, where you can come in and walk into committee rooms and hear hearings and speak to legislators as they're coming and going. So it is very important, and don't ever feel hesitant to reach out to any legislator, whether you know them or not. Thank you.
Yeah, very well.
I had a question. Sorry, Joe.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Is the S79 going to be picked up again in that veto session? That's the rental housing, health and safety reform, or when will that be looked at again? I was particularly excited that as part of that, it attached some funding for landlords to be able to do, to make repairs to units if they didn't pass code. It was really, I think, going to be supportive of many landlords in our region, especially in some of our more rural communities that have struggled with dilapidated rental units. So I'm wondering when that's going to be picked up again. It seemed like it was.
Thank
I
you. Yeah.
appreciate that question. That's what I was alluding to when I spoke of legislation that was very close to the finish line, but didn't quite make it, Jess. And we're waiting to hear that ourselves. We do not know if it will be taken up in that veto session, nor do we know whether we're really going to have the veto session or not. And I believe that's up to the decision of the majority party, whether they want to hold that session. It certainly will be taken up again ASAP when we reconvene, whenever that's going to be. And you're correct, the governor's VHIP program is in that bill, and that is a really important piece of legislation that that I was referring to when I spoke of either rehabilitating units that are offline, or Representative Murphy spoke to the home ownership piece. And in particular, there's also a carve out in that for persons who are historically marginalized, or populations that are historically marginalized when it comes to being granted home ownership opportunities. So that is a super important part of that bill. And there were many sticking points, and we came together as close as we could get. So I wish I had more concrete information for you as to when it's going to be taken up. But it certainly is not a topic that's going to be cast aside. It will be a priority.
And Jess, I just want to say that was a little bit what I was referencing when I said we have the money, but I'm not sure about the policy, because we did do some alignment of what that would require from the budget bill. The language, we aligned the two to be able to operate together. And I'm still a little foggy on whether that allowed some of those portions to go through because they're in the budget. So it is, the budget hasn't reached the governor's desk yet because there's an awful lot of that twining that occurs and trying to get things aligned. And as Representative Hango said, I think it will be interesting to see if we return on June 23rd at all. And if we do, whether we're allowed to take up items from the calendar. But our committee in particular actually left 2 items on the House calendar that were in final stage, but didn't quite cross the line.
Yeah, it has caused a little bit of question that the money is in the budget, just not, but that the S79 paused. I've read through your budget a couple of times now, the H439, you guys did a lot of great work and I'm really appreciative of that. I just really would be remiss having you all here and not making a plug for the desperate state that we're in Franklin and Grand Isle counties in terms of housing. You know, I would say in the next month, certainly after July 1st and the changes to the emergency housing program through Economic Services Division, we are really expecting about 100 individuals to be literally on the streets in St. Albans. The campgrounds are full, the shelters are full, and they will no longer qualify for the motels. So it's a pretty desperate state of affairs. And I just want to say that we have tons of money to pay for them to have apartments. We have money to pay for their security deposits. We have money, many of them have vouchers that can pay for rent in an ongoing way. Yesterday, in the entirety of Franklin County, there were 2 apartments available to rent, 2 in St. Albans, and none in any of the other towns. We just don't have places to put people.
Thank you, Jess. I was hoping you would bring this up.
And I know that Carl and Mike have both have had your hands up. So Carl, if you would go first and then Mike.
Thank you. Yeah, just Jess, you say there's lots of money available. How about some of this money for these landlords that have not been paid for over a year by certain tenants? You know, but they need assistance, and that was one of the big hanging up thing with 70.
Oh boy, we have so much money for landlords. Yeah, we really appreciate landlords. There's the Vermont emergency rental.
This is people that have not paid their rent, and landlords. I have 2 constituents myself that have, one of them has been unable to move into their own house that they rented out a year ago, and they have not been able to move back to their own home. So, I mean, there are some really desperate things. Just, how should I say it? It's not a money issue. It's how those people get their money, or that we can remove tenants that are unwilling if they have the money to pay. Anyway,
Yeah.
I just wanted to make that point. And 2, initially I was going to make the comment that as far as a lot of the rehab money for bringing marginal apartments onto line and all, I understood that was in the budget, irrespective of 79. So anyway, maybe either Lisa or Mike can confirm that, but my understanding that money is available right now, even without 79 passing. Thank you.
So yeah, I can build on that in a few different ways. So if the Senate had gotten S79 in time, so the House has passed S79, it will be in the Senate whenever we reconvene. The governor has vetoed now 3 bills, so we are almost certain to be back on June 23rd at this point to take up those bills. And so it'll be, S79 will be in the Senate. Had we passed it, the issue that Representative Rosenquist brings up, where somebody needs to move back into their own property, would have been one of the eligible exemptions from the eviction moratorium that would have allowed that person to say, you know what, you haven't paid rent and we need to move back into our house, and to get that tenant out of that property. But the larger issue that Jess brings up is one that we are investing money and looking at land use and development regulations that are getting in the way of providing more housing stock in places like Franklin County. So there's $99 million in housing funding in this budget, plus the $51 million in rental assistance. We have constantly run into the struggle of, not putting multi-unit housing in the places where it makes the most sense because of pushback from neighbors or local zoning regulations that don't allow that. And, we're in my city council hat role, we're constantly having the conversation about, making neighborhoods more livable and also adding housing stock. And sometimes those folks who are in different camps are pulling in different directions. And I think a lot of the things that we value about our villages and downtowns in Vermont are also just make it difficult for us to provide the kind of affordable housing we want. But I think that we're on a track now where over the next 3 years with this ARPA money, we're going to add thousands of units across Vermont of
No, I have to say that although the ARPA funding and the increase in funding for the state looks great, the Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development released a preliminary plan when the governor released his proposal for the 5,000 new units by 2024. And I'm hopeful that you all noticed that not a single one of those proposed projects was in our area or anywhere near it.
Did notice that, and we often disagree with the governor and the legislature. And I know that we're committed to making sure that the investments that we make benefit all 14 counties. I mean, I know Senator Ballot and Speaker Kwinski are committed to make sure that those kinds of investments get spread out to all of our communities. So thanks, Jess. It is a really huge issue. And so it does look like we're going to be back on June 23rd briefly. I think that there's a very good chance that the Senate will move forward with S79. I think that it's really ambiguous whether you can fund the programs without the policy language, but recall that the FY22 budget doesn't go into effect until July 1st. So if we are able to get our colleagues in the Senate to pass the good work we did in the House on the 23rd or the 24th of June, then that policy and budget language will sync up for July 1st.
And Representative Hango, you've had your hand up.
Thank you. I just want to build on a couple of things Representative McCarthy mentioned. One of them is the provisions in S79, that rental housing bill that would have helped landlords. I just want to be very clear that it would only help landlords in certain circumstances. Some of the circumstances that Representative Rosenquist mentioned, landlords would not have been helped under this particular compromise that was crafted within our committee and was passed by the House. So there are still some cracks that tenants will fall through and landlords will fall through that would not have been helped by this legislation. So it wasn't a cure-all in many respects. I also want to address Jess's concern about Franklin County and housing. First of all, we have to have willing folks who own perhaps blighted or not up to code buildings who want to participate in a program such as what is being suggested. And secondly, we understand that there is a little disconnect about where the current iteration of funding is going, but my understanding is it's very much in flux. The plan is very much in flux. And the more advocacy we can do for our individual areas, the better. So certainly if someone who is working on making these plans isn't quite aware of what is needed in pockets that are often, and I'm going to say this, that often forgotten, we need to be very vocal about that. And Jess, you're great about that. So I urge you to continue to reach out to DHCD in terms of where you see a need that needs to be filled. I see Representative McCarthy nodding his head, because truly the squeaky wheel does get the grease. So I don't think anything is set in concrete right now is what I'm saying. And there is room to work, and we plan on addressing those issues going forward that we can help. I think I mentioned this earlier, to do the greatest good for the most people. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hango. Michelle Trea.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't lose Representative Murphy's point from actually before the meeting started about some of the things that are happening here with housing in Franklin County. I have several friends who are actually property managers for multiple units. I know in conversation with them that there's some of the units are going to be shut down as soon as the current tenants are out because of the destruction to the property and how much money it's cost the people that are the landlords. And there's actually a lot of longtime landlords who are actually selling their properties also because they just want out at this point because of everything they've gone through. So I think it just adds more to this whole complicated housing thing. So I just don't want us to lose sight of that as well, that there are a lot of landlords that are hurting as well as obviously the tenants.
Thank you, Michelle. I really was trying to put forward that, as Jess says, there are 2 apartments listed in Franklin County, but I don't think that means there's 2 apartments empty in Franklin County. I think that there are many landlords who either have been able to get to the point of no longer being landlords, or are intending to as soon as they have said farewell to their tenants. And people have their own reasons for many of these changes, but I think we do have to address how we, through the agencies, can, with this money the state's been fortunate enough to be bequeathed from the feds, how we can support keeping those apartments available and open. And the 700, and as you said, 100 in Franklin County, individuals who we've taken care of and housed through the pandemic are about to hit the streets without an option. And that's really not acceptable. We've done too good a job of getting people under roofs to just say, well, we did our work and, good luck. So I really do beg that everyone who knows folks who are landlords get the word out that there is money, there is assistance, connect with the agency to figure out how you can get supported in the damages and challenges that are you're incurring as a landlord, to get beyond that and get people housed.
We really want the community, I think, to understand that the $350 million that Vermont received for emergency rental assistance program is money that goes through tenants to landlords. It's really small business assistance in a way, right? It doesn't stop with the tenant. It lands in the pocket of the landlord. It's funding to support landlords who are not only small business owners, but in many cases, social service providers. Providing a home for somebody is it's a sticky business, right? Because it's sort of an intimate relationship. So if people could understand that funding is really to support the landlords and making their businesses fiscally stable, that would be very helpful.